What if the most powerful medicine in human history was never sold in a pharmacy? What if it was cooked in a clay pot over an open fire by someone who didn't need a medical degree because they already knew what the body needed? For thousands of years, across deserts and mountains and ancient cities, healers, prophets, and ordinary families prepared soups that supported the body in ways we are only now beginning to understand again. Most people today have never heard of lamb bone broth cooked with black seed. They have never tasted barley soup the way it was made in ancient Mesopotamia. They have never tried the simple onion broth that field workers in medieval Europe drank every winter to survive. And yet, these were not folk tales. These were daily practices. These were the recipes passed from grandmother to daughter, from village healer to apprentice for thousands of years. We are going to look at 15 of them today. Number 5 on this list involves a soup so old it appears in ancient Egyptian records, and modern researchers are now beginning to understand why it worked. Number 9 is so simple it barely qualifies as a recipe, but the tradition behind it goes further than most civilizations. And number 13, a broth made from something most people throw away today, was once considered a healing gift reserved for the sick and the vulnerable. Before we begin, if you are someone who values this kind of knowledge, the old ways, the forgotten remedies, the wisdom that survived long before pharmaceuticals existed, consider subscribing. This channel is a quiet place for people who want to remember what was once known. Now, let us begin. And this is where the first item begins.
1. Bone broth, the original medicine. Before bone broth became a modern wellness trend, it was simply what people did with bones. Nothing was wasted. After a meal, the carcass went back into the pot. Water was added, sometimes an onion, a root, a handful of dried herbs. The pot would simmer through the night. In Proverbs and throughout the Hebrew Scriptures, the marrow of bones is described as richness and nourishment, health to the navel and marrow to the bones. This was not poetic language in the way we use it today. It was a literal understanding. The marrow inside bones held something sustaining. Modern nutritional science has begun to look at this more carefully. Long-cooked bone broth contains compounds like collagen, gelatin, proline, and glycine, substances that may support the lining of the digestive tract, joint health, and the structural integrity of skin and connective tissue. Hippocrates, the Greek physician whose name is still attached to the oath every doctor takes, reportedly recommended bone broth to his patients with intestinal disorders. That was over 2,000 years ago. The practice did not change for most of human history. It was only in the last century, as packaged food replaced home cooking and as the idea of throwing away the bones became normal, that this daily ritual disappeared from most households. What remained was the knowledge, held quietly by those who still cooked from scratch. Long and slow, that is how it was always made.
2. Black seed soup. The seed that heals everything except death. There is a saying attributed to the Prophet Muhammad, recorded in Islamic tradition, that goes, "Black seed is a cure for every disease except death." In Arabic, this seed is called Habatus Sauda. In the modern world, it is known as Nigella sativa, or black cumin. For centuries, this seed was added to soups and broths across the Arab world, North Africa, and into South Asia. Not in large quantities, just a small amount, heated gently in warm broth, sometimes with a little honey stirred in after. What is remarkable is that modern researchers have taken a serious interest in this small black seed. Studies have examined its active compound, hymoquinone, for potential anti-inflammatory, antioxidant, and immune-supporting properties.
The findings have been promising enough that it has become one of the more studied medicinal seeds in contemporary botanical research. But here is what is interesting. The people who used it for thousands of years did not need studies. They had observation. They had generations of consistent use. They had a saying that survived across entire civilizations. A small spoonful of black seed, warmed in broth, was given to those who were unwell, to the elderly, to nursing mothers, to those recovering from illness. Simple, quiet, consistent. This is where so much ancient knowledge lives, not in dramatic cures, but in daily, gentle practice. 3. Lentil soup, the soup that saved a birthright. Most people know the story. In the book of Genesis, Esau came home famished and traded his birthright to his brother Jacob for a bowl of red lentil stew. It is one of the oldest recorded food transactions in human history. But lentil soup was not just a story in Scripture. It was the daily sustenance of ordinary people across the ancient Near East for thousands of years. Lentils were among the first crops ever domesticated. Archaeologists have found lentil remains at ancient sites in the Fertile Crescent dating back nearly 10,000 years. What lentils offer is remarkable for such a small, humble legume. They are dense in plant-based protein, iron, folate, and slow-digesting carbohydrates. In traditional medicine, lentil soup was considered restorative, given to those who were weak, to those recovering from blood loss, to women after childbirth. In Ayurvedic tradition, red lentils are described as one of the most easily digestible legumes, gentle on the stomach, warming to the system, grounding in their effect. The soup itself is simple: red lentils, water, perhaps a little onion, a pinch of cumin, a squeeze of lemon. It requires almost nothing. It gives almost everything. That a man would trade his inheritance for it tells you something about how deeply nourishing it must have felt to an exhausted body. 4. Garlic broth, the peasant's remedy. There's a reason garlic appears in almost every traditional food culture on Earth. In ancient Egypt, garlic was given to pyramid workers to maintain their strength. The Talmud lists garlic as one of 5 foods with specific health properties. Roman soldiers carried it. Medieval European peasants ate it in broth throughout the winter. Garlic broth, at its simplest, is just crushed or whole garlic cloves simmered in water or stock, sometimes with herbs like thyme or rosemary. It is pungent, it is strong, and for centuries it was considered among the most effective thing a person could consume at the first sign of illness. Modern science has found that garlic contains a compound called allicin, which forms when garlic is crushed or chopped. Research suggests it may have antimicrobial properties, though cooking affects its potency. Traditionally, raw garlic was added near the end of the broth-making process or consumed alongside the warm liquid, specifically to preserve as much of its active qualities as possible. During the 1918 influenza pandemic, there are accounts of garlic being used extensively in communities across Europe and North America. Herbalists and folk healers of the time recommended it. Whether it helped in the way they believed is difficult to say with certainty, but the tradition of reaching for garlic at times of illness is one that stretches back far longer than any modern understanding of what it contains. The peasant knew something, perhaps not the chemistry, but the pattern, and the pattern was reliable.
5. Fenugreek broth, the ancient Egyptian recovery soup. This is the one that appears in ancient records. Fenugreek, in Arabic, hilba, in Hebrew, tilton, was cultivated in Egypt as far back as 1500 BCE. Ancient Egyptian medical papyri, including the Ebers Papyrus, one of the oldest known medical texts ever found, list fenugreek as a treatment for a range of conditions. It was used to reduce fever. It was given to mothers after childbirth. It was used to soothe the stomach and support digestion. Fenugreek soup was made by boiling the seeds slowly in water until a dark, slightly bitter broth formed. This was consumed warm. In some traditions, it was sweetened with honey or combined with other warming herbs. What is interesting is that modern research has examined fenugreek seeds for their potential to support blood sugar regulation and inflammation. The seeds contain soluble fiber and compounds that researchers have been studying with some interest, particularly regarding their effect on metabolism and hormonal balance. But the most striking historical use was this. In several ancient cultures, fenugreek broth was considered the first thing given to a woman who had just given birth. Before anything else, before solid food, before other remedies, warm fenugreek broth. The reasoning, passed down through generations, was that it helped the body restore itself, that it warmed the internal system, that it encouraged recovery. We are still learning in modern laboratories what those ancient midwives and healers already understood through centuries of careful observation. Some knowledge is not lost. It is waiting to be rediscovered.
6. Barley soup, the grain that built civilizations. Before wheat dominated agriculture, barley was the grain. It fed the armies of ancient Mesopotamia. It was used as currency in early Sumerian society. It appears throughout the Old Testament as a food of substance and value. The book of Ruth describes gleaning barley from the fields. The miracle of loaves in the New Testament involved barley bread. Barley soup was made by simply simmering pearled barley in broth or water with whatever vegetables were available: root vegetables, leeks, onions, sometimes dried legumes. It was thick, it was filling, and it sustained people through winters and famines and long days of physical labor. What modern nutrition has confirmed about barley is significant. It contains a type of soluble fiber called beta-glucan, which has been studied for its potential effects on cholesterol, blood sugar regulation, and gut health. It is one of the most fiber-dense grains available. Traditional healers used barley water, the strained liquid from cooked barley, as a remedy for kidney complaints, for fever, for digestive upset. It was one of the first things given to the sick in many ancient hospitals, which were often attached to monasteries. Monks understood something about barley. Soldiers understood it. Farmers understood it. It is only recently that most of the world forgot.
7. Nettle soup, the weed that fed Europe. Stinging nettles grow wild across most of the northern hemisphere. Touch the leaves without gloves and you will understand immediately why they are called stinging. And yet, for most of human history, nettles were considered one of the most valuable free foods available. During times of war and famine in Europe, nettle soup was not a last resort. It was a well-established preparation. People knew how to collect the young spring leaves with cloth or careful hands. They knew that cooking the nettles completely neutralized the sting, and they knew that the resulting soup was deeply nourishing. There are accounts from Scotland and Ireland during the famines of the 19th century of entire families sustained by wild nettles when other food was unavailable. Travelers documented it. Writers recorded it. It was not new, it was ancient. What nettles contain is striking for a wild plant. They are high in iron, calcium, magnesium, potassium, and vitamins A, C, and K. Traditional herbalism in Europe described nettles as a blood cleanser, a remedy for joint pain, and a support for kidney health. Modern herbalists still use nettles, and botanical researchers have looked at nettle preparations with some interest, noting potential anti-inflammatory properties in certain extracts. The soup is simple. Young spring nettle leaves simmered in broth or water with onion and potato. The sting disappears with heat. What remains is something deep green, earthy, and quietly powerful. It grew freely, it required nothing, and for centuries it fed the people who were hungry enough to notice it. If you are finding this kind of knowledge valuable, the old remedies, the forgotten plants, the recipes that history almost erased, take a moment to like this video. It helps more people find this kind of content. And if you have not subscribed yet, this is a good moment.
8. Turmeric broth, the golden remedy. In India, there is a preparation so old and so common that almost every grandmother knows it without ever having read about it. Warm milk with turmeric is one version, but before turmeric became fashionable in modern wellness culture, it was most commonly consumed in soup and broth form across South and Southeast Asia and through trade routes into the Middle East and North Africa. Turmeric broth is simply golden broth. Warm water or light stock, turmeric, a little black pepper, sometimes ginger, sometimes a small amount of fat to help dissolve the active compounds. The addition of black pepper is not accidental. Traditional cooks discovered through observation that black pepper dramatically increased the body's ability to use turmeric. It took modern chemistry to explain why. Piperine, a compound in black pepper, has been shown to significantly increase the absorption of curcumin, turmeric's primary active compound. This is one of the most striking examples of traditional knowledge arriving at a correct conclusion without scientific tools. They did not know about curcumin and piperine. They knew that the combination worked better, and so they used it together. Curcumin has been studied extensively for potential anti-inflammatory and antioxidant properties. The research is ongoing and complex, and there are important nuances about absorption and dosage. But the foundation of the practice, consuming turmeric with black pepper and fat in warm liquid, is precisely what nutritional biochemists would recommend today. The grandmother knew. She just knew it differently.
9. Rainwater herb broth, the nomad's survival soup. This one is almost too simple to describe, and yet it may be the oldest preparation on this list. Across nomadic cultures, the Bedouin of the Arabian Desert, the pastoral tribes of Central Asia, the wandering peoples of sub-Saharan Africa, there was a practice of making broth from whatever was available. Dried herbs carried in a pouch, a bone kept from the last meal, wild roots pulled from the ground. The broth was made with whatever water was at hand and whatever heat could be produced. No recipe, no measurements, no specific ingredients, just the knowledge that warming water with herbs and animal material produced something sustaining and restorative. What this tells us is not about any specific ingredient. It is about the method itself, the act of simmering, of applying heat to water with herbs and organic material extracts compounds that cold water does not. It makes minerals available. It breaks down fibrous plant matter. It creates something the raw ingredients alone cannot provide. This is why soup, as a category, has been independently discovered by every human culture in history, not because people traded recipes across continents, but because the method works, and a hungry, observant person anywhere on Earth will eventually discover it. The simplicity of this practice is its power. Sometimes the most profound knowledge has no name. It is just what people do when they are paying attention.
10. Miso soup, the living broth. Japan has maintained one of the longest traditions of fermented food consumption in the world, and at the center of Japanese daily eating for over 1,000 years has been miso soup, a simple broth made from fermented soybean paste dissolved in dashi stock. Miso is not just flavoring, it is a living food. The fermentation process, which can take months or even years for certain varieties, produces beneficial bacteria, enzymes, and a range of bioactive compounds. Traditional Japanese medicine considered miso soup to be warming, digestive, and strengthening. It was eaten at breakfast, not dinner, first thing, before anything else. There is an often cited observation that in the aftermath of the atomic bombing of Nagasaki in 1945, Dr. Tatsuichiro Akizuki, a physician working at a hospital near the epicenter, fed his patients and staff a diet that included miso soup and brown rice. His accounts suggest that his patients fared better than many others in the surrounding area. This observation, made by one doctor in extraordinary circumstances, is not a clinical trial, but it sparked decades of Japanese research into the potential radioprotective compounds in miso, particularly an antioxidant called genistein. The story is not a simple one, the science is not settled, but the fact that a single doctor's wartime observation led to serious scientific inquiry says something about the value of paying attention to old practices. Miso soup is still made the same way it has been made for over a millennium in Japan. Fermented paste, warm water, perhaps a piece of tofu, perhaps a strip of seaweed. It is not changed because it did not need to be.
11. Lamb bone broth with herbs, the shepherd's medicine. This is where the list begins to slow down. In pastoral cultures across the Middle East, the Caucasus, and North Africa, lamb was not only food, it was livelihood, wealth, and sacrifice. And the bones, after every feast, every celebration, every ordinary meal, went back into the pot. Lamb bone broth made with herbs was a specific preparation, not just general broth, but a targeted one. Rosemary and thyme were most commonly added, both herbs with documented traditional use in supporting circulation and digestion. In some traditions, a stick of cinnamon was added, in others, dried citrus peel. The broth would simmer for many hours, sometimes overnight. The result was rich, dark, deeply savory. It was given specifically to those who were weak, the elderly, the sick, the convalescing, children who were thin, women who were anemic. In Bedouin tradition, this broth was considered so restorative that it was the first thing brought to someone who had been ill for several days, before solid food, before anything else. Warm lamb broth, carried in a vessel, given slowly. The gelatin released from lamb bones during long simmering may support the integrity of the gut lining. The minerals extracted from marrow and bone, calcium, phosphorus, magnesium, become more available in broth form than they are in the solid bone itself. But perhaps more than the specific nutrients, there is something in the act of being given warm broth by someone who cares about you, something that changes the body's response in ways we cannot fully measure. That, too, the shepherd understood.
12. Ginger and bone pepper soup, the healer of West Africa. Across West Africa, there is a preparation so deeply embedded in the culture that it is not even thought of as medicine. It is simply food. It is called pepper soup, and it is made differently in every household, in every region, in every country. But the core remains consistent. Meat or fish, a large amount of ginger, local spices, and broth simmered until deeply fragrant and warming. In Nigeria, pepper soup is served at almost every significant gathering, after childbirth, during illness, at celebrations, at funerals. It is the food of transition, of recovery, of community. The ginger at the heart of this preparation is not incidental. Ginger has been used medicinally for thousands of years across Asian, African, and Middle Eastern traditions. Traditional Ayurvedic medicine considers ginger the universal healer. It has been studied for potential anti-nausea, anti-inflammatory, and digestive effects. Gingerols and shogols, the active compounds in ginger, have attracted significant research interest. But what is perhaps most striking about West African pepper soup is its social function. It was not consumed alone. It was made communally, shared communally, and given as an act of care. The preparation itself, the smelling of the spices, the gathering around the pot, was understood to be part of the healing. Modern research on the relationship between social connection and health outcomes suggests this may not be sentimental. The act of being cared for, of sitting together, of receiving food made by human hands, these things appear to have measurable effects on the body's recovery. Ancient cultures did not separate the food from the act of giving it. Perhaps they were right not to.
13. Onion broth. The broth from what we throw away. This is the one. The soup made from what most people discard without a second thought. The skins and outer layers of onions, the papery, brownish material that comes off when you peel an onion, are typically thrown straight into the rubbish bin, but for most of human history, they went into the pot. Onion skin broth was not glamorous. It was the food of poor households, of careful households, of households where nothing was wasted. The skins would be gathered over days or weeks, dried, stored, then simmered with whatever else was available, perhaps a few peppercorns, a bit of salt, a dried bay leaf. What comes out is a broth that is deep amber to dark brown in color, earthy, mild, and quietly interesting. Onion skins contain a flavonoid called quercetin in significant concentrations, far higher than in the onion flesh itself. Quercetin has been studied for potential anti-inflammatory, antioxidant, and antiviral properties. Researchers have noted that it is particularly concentrated in the outer layers and skins of onions, the parts most commonly discarded. This is not a coincidence. In the pre-modern world, the entire plant was used: the skin, the root, the outer leaves, the seeds. Waste was not an option. And in not wasting, those communities were consuming compounds that the wealthy households, who could afford to be selective, were throwing away. The peasant who simmered onion skins did not know about quercetin, but the practice, born of necessity, of not wasting, turned out to be correct. The broth from what we throw away may have been among the most therapeutic things ever discarded.
14. Chicken soup. Why every culture made it. We arrive near the end of this list with perhaps the most familiar soup in the world. But familiarity is not the same as understanding. Chicken soup appears across virtually every culture and tradition that ever kept chickens. Chinese chicken soup with goji berries and astragalus root, Jewish chicken soup with matzah and herbs, which has been studied by researchers at the University of Nebraska and found to have measurable anti-inflammatory effects in laboratory conditions. West African chicken broth with dried herbs, Indian chicken soup with ginger, garlic, and cardamom, medieval European chicken broth with saffron, considered among the most restorative preparations available. Maimonides, the 12th century Jewish physician and philosopher, explicitly recommended chicken broth for those suffering from respiratory illness. He described it in his medical writings as the best preparation for the weak and the ill. The science around chicken soup has been looked at more carefully than most people realize. The combination of hot liquid, which may help clear nasal passages, with compounds from simmered chicken and vegetables, appears to produce an environment in the body that slows the movement of neutrophils, certain white blood cells involved in inflammatory processes. This may explain why chicken soup has been associated with relief from cold and flu symptoms across so many traditions. It is not magic. It is chemistry. But the chemistry has been in the pot for thousands of years. Every grandmother in every culture who made this soup when someone was sick, they were practicing something real. They did not call it science, but it was.
15. The broth of roots and silence. What was always there. This is where everything has been leading. In the oldest healing traditions, across the ancient world, there was an understanding that health was not an event. It was not the dramatic cure, the powerful medicine, the miraculous remedy. Health was something maintained, daily, quietly, through consistent, simple practices that accumulated over a lifetime. The final preparation on this list does not have a single name. It belongs to no one culture. It has been made in various forms across every continent in every era of human history. It is broth made from roots. Burdock root, dandelion root, chicory root, astragalus root, ashwagandha root. Depending on where in the world you are, the roots change, but the method remains the same. Roots, dried or fresh, simmered slowly in water for a long time, drunk warm regularly. In traditional Chinese medicine, root broths are considered deeply tonifying. They are not emergency medicine. They are maintenance medicine. They support what practitioners call the foundational systems, the kidney essence, the liver function, the lung energy. These are not Western diagnostic categories, but they represent a coherent, ancient system of understanding how the body sustains itself over time. In Western herbal tradition, roots have been used for what herbalists call adaptogenic or alterative properties, supporting the body's ability to maintain balance under stress, to process and eliminate what does not serve it, to gradually strengthen systems that have become depleted. Modern research has begun to look at several of these roots with genuine interest. Astragalus has been studied for immune modulation. Dandelion root has been examined for liver-supportive compounds. Ashwagandha root has attracted significant research into stress adaptation, with findings that have generated real scientific discussion. But the deeper truth is this. Across every civilization that practiced traditional medicine, there was one consistent thread. The most important remedies were not dramatic. They were not rare. They were not expensive. They were roots from the ground, simmered in water, consumed quietly day after day. Not for the crisis, for the ordinary days before the crisis. The people who lived closest to the earth understood that prevention was not a modern concept. It was the oldest wisdom available. Feed the body what it needs before it tells you that it needs it. Use the whole plant, waste nothing, keep the pot warm. This broth, this nameless, ancient, universal preparation is not a remedy in the dramatic sense. It is a relationship, a daily conversation between the body and the earth it came from. That is what was always there. That is what we forgot. And the forgetting was recent. The knowing was ancient.
We have reached the end of this list, but not the end of the idea. Everything on this list shares something. It was not discovered in a laboratory. It was discovered in the kitchen, in the field, beside the fire, in the act of watching someone heal and remembering what they were given. The knowledge was accumulated over centuries by ordinary people who were paying very close attention to what worked. Ancient knowledge was not primitive. It was not superstition dressed in healing language. It was observational science, conducted across thousands of years by millions of people in conditions of genuine need. What survived was what worked. What was forgotten was often only forgotten because it stopped being necessary, because a generation stopped being hungry enough or humble enough to pay attention to simple things. The pot is still there. The roots are still growing. The bones are still in the broth if you choose to put them in. Nothing was truly lost. It was only set aside. Perhaps now is a good moment to pick it up again. If you have made it to the end of this video, this kind of quiet knowledge clearly speaks to something in you. Subscribe if you have not already. There is more here, more forgotten practices, more ancient remedies, more of the wisdom that was quietly passed down and quietly ignored. It is worth preserving. Take care of yourself, the old way if you can.